Have you ever heard a sound that doesn't quite register as human? Not shouting, not crying. Something rawer than that. A noise that seems to come from somewhere deeper than language itself. A sound the body makes when the mind can no longer process what it's hearing. I heard that sound yesterday in a federal courtroom. It came from a defendant who had just been told that he would spend the rest of his life in prison with no possibility of release. Not parole, not review, not any form of early release. Ever. The judge was reading the sentence in a calm, controlled voice. No anger, no drama, just procedure. She said, "This court sentences you to life in federal prison." And then she continued, adding the words that changed everything. With no possibility of release under any circumstances. Before she could move on, the defendant made a sound I will never forget. It wasn't a word. It wasn't even a scream in the normal sense. It was a howl. Sharp, broken, almost animal. His mouth opened, his chest heaved, and the sound echoed through the room. Then his eyes rolled back. His body stiffened for a moment, and then he collapsed, dropping straight down onto the courtroom floor while still making that sound. Then silence. The case itself had been overwhelming from the beginning. Multiple counts of first-degree murder committed as part of a continuing criminal enterprise. The prosecution had originally been eligible to seek the federal death penalty, but chose not to. Instead, they pursued life without release. The evidence was devastating. Surveillance footage placing the defendant at multiple crime scenes. Ballistic analysis tying weapons registered to him to the murders. Testimony from accomplices who described his role in planning and financing the killings. Financial records showing payments made to the shooters. Cell phone data placing him at coordination meetings before the crimes. The defense challenged everything. They questioned the credibility of cooperating witnesses. They suggested alternative explanations. They attacked the reliability of the evidence. But none of it created doubt. The proof was layered, consistent, and independently corroborated. The jury deliberated for just 8 hours. In a case of this complexity, that speed tells you everything. It means there was no serious disagreement, no confusion, no close call. They went count by count and found him guilty on all of them. After the verdict, the judge scheduled sentencing in the usual way. Time for victim impact statements. Time for written arguments. Time for formal procedure. The defendant remained in custody, shackled and guarded, considered both a flight risk and a danger. Yesterday was the sentencing hearing. The courtroom was full. Victims' families sat together, holding photos, gripping hands. Law enforcement filled the back rows. Media lined the walls. The defendant was brought in wearing a standard jail uniform, ankles chained, hands cuffed. He sat between his attorneys, his face completely blank. He showed no reaction as family members stood one by one to speak. Mothers described sons who never came home. Children spoke about growing up without parents. Spouses described lives permanently altered. The grief in that room was heavy, almost physical. The defendant stared straight ahead. The prosecutor followed, detailing the brutality of the crimes and the calculated nature of the violence. She emphasized the lack of remorse, the planning, the complete disregard for human life. She argued that only one sentence could adequately protect the public and reflect the seriousness of the crimes. The defense responded with arguments about upbringing, rehabilitation, and the abstract possibility of redemption. But even as the words were spoken, everyone in the room understood their weight was minimal. The law required a life sentence. The only question left was whether any possibility of release would remain. The judge began her remarks carefully. She reviewed the evidence, the victims, the length of the criminal enterprise, the leadership role the defendant played. She spoke about deterrence and public safety, about accountability. Then she turned directly to the defendant and asked if he wished to say anything. He shook his head. The judge nodded. She asked him to stand. He did, gripping the table as his attorneys rose beside him. One placed a hand on his shoulder, and then the judge spoke the words that ended everything. The judge explained that while the sentencing guidelines mandated life imprisonment, the court still had discretion on one final issue: whether any mechanism for release would ever be available. She made it clear she had considered every factor presented: age, background, theoretical rehabilitation, and she rejected them all. She stated that the magnitude of harm, the number of lives lost, and the complete absence of remorse left no room for mercy. She concluded that the defendant posed a permanent danger and that the public required permanent protection. Then she said it. No parole, no commutation, no compassionate release, no review. Life in federal prison for the remainder of his natural life. The reaction was immediate and visceral. The defendant released that sound again, a guttural, uncontrollable howl, as his body betrayed him. His hands came off the table. His chest seized. His knees buckled. He fell hard, striking the floor as the scream cut off mid-sound. For a moment, no one moved. Then the marshals were there. One checked for a pulse. Another radioed for medical assistance. The defense attorneys dropped to their knees, calling his name. He did not respond. Paramedics arrived within minutes. His blood pressure was dangerously elevated, his pulse erratic. They determined he had experienced a severe vasovagal syncope triggered by acute psychological trauma. In simple terms, the stress overwhelmed his nervous system, and his body shut down. He regained partial consciousness briefly, confused, disoriented. He asked where he was. When told he was in court, he asked why. When informed he had just been sentenced to life without release, he began screaming again and had to be sedated. He was transported to a hospital for observation and evaluation, including assessment for a head injury from the fall. Later that afternoon, the judge reconvened the court without him present. She placed findings on the record. The sentence had been properly imposed. The defendant was present when it was pronounced. His loss of consciousness did not invalidate the proceeding. The sentence stands. Life without release in the federal system means exactly what it sounds like. There is no parole, no early release, no automatic review. The defendant will likely be housed in a maximum security federal penitentiary, spending most days confined to a cell with limited movement, limited contact, and no meaningful prospect of change. Presidential commutations are rare to the point of near non-existence. Compassionate release applies only in extreme medical circumstances, and even then is discretionary. In practical terms, this man will die in prison. What broke him was not the word life. He likely expected that. What shattered him was the finality. The knowledge that there would never be an end date, never a release hearing, never a chance to count down time. Hope didn't diminish, it disappeared. That realization hit him all at once, without warning, in front of everyone. And his body reacted before his mind could form words. For the victims' families, reactions were complex. Some felt relief. Some felt emptiness. No sentence restores what was taken. But there is closure in knowing the person responsible will never harm anyone again. Appeals will be filed. They always are. Claims of excessiveness, arguments about proportionality, constitutional challenges. They will almost certainly fail. The judge followed procedure, explained her reasoning. The sentence aligns with federal law for crimes of this magnitude. What remains is the reality the defendant now faces every day he wakes up. A life measured not in years, but in routine. Not in milestones, but in repetition. Not in choices, but in confinement. That scream was the sound of a human being realizing that everything ahead of him was already decided. No decisions left. No future to imagine. Just time. And that is what life without release truly is. Not just a punishment of the body, but a permanent sentence imposed on the mind. That sound will stay with me for a long time. The judge nodded. She asked him to stand. He did, gripping the table as his attorneys rose beside him. One placed a hand on his shoulder, and then the judge spoke the words that ended everything.